Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we discuss my thoughts on episode 9 of the anime series, Violet Evergarden. And this was, for all intents and purposes, a somewhat intriguing episode, still very much continuing on with where we left off, delving finally into, the story of Violet herself, the titular character. The story has now finally put her into the focus and is very much revolving around the aftermath of the loss of the Major's life, Gilbert's life, and how that all shook down. Basically it was a point of conversation between one of you guys and I in the comments on my previous episode discussion video. And most of what I had speculated and suspected to be the case proved to be true, as far as, I had assumed that they would try to make an escape after having been shot at. I was surprised that Gilbert was actually shot in the face and the eye in the previous episode. And I had assumed that, they would sort of try to escape, try to find cover. Maybe there would be a firefight. And, of course, we pointedly saw that there was a firefight. Violet, took to shooting back at the enemy soldiers that were taking pot shots at them. And it's kind of, funny in the fact that almost every single shot is pointedly hitting Gilbert. It's not hitting her. One shot hits her in the arm, and then, one of the soldiers, throws a sticky bomb, and when it goes off, it takes her other arm off, and the way it sops out of her sleeve and lands on the ground was really disconcerting. The sound effects there, actually seeing, the disembodied limb on the ground, I almost expected the hand to go wah, 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 but it was disconcerting, and the way she hunkers down over Gilbert and uses her teeth, kind of One Punch Man-esque, grabbing on to his shirt, trying to drag him out of this stairwell. I had assumed they would end up in a stairwell, and that's where all this would transpire. And so all of my, speculation points were answered. And so there was no real surprise there for me. And I think apart from my being in somewhat of an ill mood, it was also the fact that none of this was a surprise. It was just answering to what I had already suspected to begin with. Nothing really new. I think the thing that really stood out to me in this episode as being intriguing, even in spite of my foul mood watching the episode, was the post-traumatic stress disorder level nightmare that she has when she's closed herself off. She revisits the place of Gilbert's demise, and she had already gone back there earlier, in the episode, as having been followed by Hodgins, the very heartfelt and teary-eyed conversation between them both, recounting those last moments, and she was sifting through the debris, the rocks, trying to find some evidence to, basically finally align for herself that Gilbert was well and truly dead. And I felt for her that. I mean, it was the most stark sort of visual sequence to me in the episode, because it was very understated. You have Hodgins standing behind her, and the walls that have caved in behind the both of them, and amongst all the debris that she's down on her knees and her head is bowed and everything. The visual imagery there was stunning. But as I say, the PTSD level nightmare she has where she's gone back, I thought she was legitimately back in that place again, and she had found herself in the stairwell again. And when she starts to have the vision of Gilbert, and he's fine, he's not wounded, and he's like, what are you wearing? Their whole conversation, and it was unsettling, and it was strange, and I wasn't sure, was she in the place in the here and now, and having this ghostly vision, was this a product of her mind while she was revisiting the place? Was it perchance some strange thing involving Gilbert's brother, because some of his words, as the wounds would suddenly appear on his body and everything on his person, some of his dialogue mirrored the threatening, accusatory tones of Gilbert's brother in that scene at the end of the one episode, which we never picked up with again. And I started to think, well, that's interesting. Maybe, maybe that was a dream. Maybe when she had been at the butt of that encounter with Gilbert's brother. She came off the boat and he was like, you're a memoir doll with all the, lives you've taken and all this stuff. It's a very disdainful tone. I had started to think maybe this was somehow, the way the mind works, where it sort of pieces together loose elements that you've been thinking about. It could be for weeks, it could be for months, it could be just for the last couple of days. And I had assumed, looking at this nightmare sequence when it was finally, revealed that that's what it was, where this ghostly apparition of the wounded Gilbert, at first fine and stoic and completely healthy, when he had turned dark and the blood had swelled in upon the steps, the stairwell that they were both occupying, and she snaps to, she wakes up out of it. I had started to sort of loosely rationalize, well, maybe that's what that encounter was with the brother. That would kind of sort of explain why it was never picked up with again, because maybe this wasn't an actual encounter. Maybe this was her brain filling in a lot of loose information about how the brother always considered her, about what Hodgins had told her about being sort of, like lit up with all the guilt and the remorse and things she hadn't even really, wrapped her mind around, about all the lives she took and all the heinous things she did for the sake of war. She hadn't worked any of that stuff out. So maybe this was all a hodgepodge of all these loose little bits of thoughts and lines of thinking that had come together, culminated, and that encounter with the brother was really just one of these PTSD level nightmares. Then that would explain away, again, as I say, why that was never picked up with again, why they didn't develop that any further, why the next episode completely eschewed that and went in a completely different direction. That could have been a nightmare, a dream she had on the train or whatever it was that led her to the destination where she had to, write the letter for the one kid, or transcribe all the books of literature, whatever it was that had followed on from that particular sequence. I don't know. This is just, my speculation, my trying to work out the very uneven bobbing and weaving of the plotting of this series and the pacing of it. And this entire episode, speaking of that, like the way it rounds out, this could have been like the last episode. We still got 5 episodes left. And for all intents and purposes, at least where I watched it, no OP, no ED. You heard some music, and saw the credits, but it was overlaying what was actually happening with the characters, the dialogue, the interactions, and whatever. And it felt, by and large, like, okay, is this the last episode? Like, I had to check. I had to go on my anime list when I log in and check it off, like, okay, episode 9 watched. Oh, there's supposed to be 14? Okay. News to me. It could have been over with this one. She goes in and talks to Hodgins again, and Hodgins been getting the crappy end of the stick every which way. The sort of like pseudo boss lady that works just under him, some interesting dialogue about how they both have scars hold over from the war, and they both have these transgressions they haven't worked beyond, and in that way they can relate to where Violet is. And I like how, the lady, I never quite remember her name, but she poses the question to Hodgins, after reaming him, how could you tell her? She's on fire. She's burning with all the remorse and the guilt. And once you figure that out, it's going to be a crushing blow to you and all this stuff. He's speaking from experience there. And it's something based on that dialogue shared between them that they both, have encountered. They both have suffered similar circumstances as a product of this war. So I thought that was somewhat interesting. And just, his words that he imparts to Violet in the end when she's finally sort of cased the city streets. And, a lot of the tail end of this episode is we're recollecting back to all of her accomplishments through sort of present day answers to that. Spencer, Luculia's brother, comes and pointedly wants her to write a letter of thanks and admiration and appreciation to Luculia for the letter that she, had Violet write for her on his behalf, which got him back into living a life, a productive life, got him away from alcohol, got him away from wasting away, and got him a job and all this kind of stuff. And he really wanted to send his heartfelt praises and thanks to his sister, and he had to do it through Violet because she was the through line the first time, calling back to the princess and the prince. We see them briefly, we see the playwright again, and all of these things, she sees a violet petal floating on the breeze in front of her, and calls back to Gilbert's, live up to that name, sort of, approximation of the fact that why he gave her the name Violet. Beauty, awe, splendor, life, living, live up to that. And she finally makes the decision to embrace that. And she runs back, to Hodges. She gets right up in his face and pointedly is like, what's going on with me? How can I live with all of this darkness? Is it going to consume me? Is that all there is to my life? And I really liked his, sort of breaking down and not coming out with it forthright, because it's answering to his own internal dilemma that he too is suffering. We know through the dialogue, as I say, between he and the boss lady of the Auto Memoir Dolls, this particular branch, that they have both faced the same thing, the scars of war, of bloodshed, of lives taken, the brutality and things that no human being should normally have to do, have to enact. And so they're suffering too. And his breaking down in that moment is just all kinds of his wearing it on his sleeve, that we're cut from the same cloth, Violet. I feel it too. I've felt it too. But you've made positive changes to answer to all the negative ones that came before it. You've had a positive effect. You've chosen life. You've chosen living. You've chosen that positivity. You've evolved and you've grown enough to really embrace so much of that. And for all that positive change, for all of that positive effect you're having on these surrounding characters, as we see, even the co-workers that are anime exclusive characters, they wrote her a letter because they care about her. They want her back. They enjoy her, accompaniment with this job, with her friendship, with, just getting along with her, being around her. And there's no truer estimation of life when you get right down to it, and so I really appreciated that. While the majority of the episode was been there, done that, okay, I already speculated, okay, it confirms this, that, and the other thing. I stand by the fact that I didn't feel like there was anything really surprising, anything really new, with the exception of that PTSD level nightmare, because it did surprise me. It did throw me for a loop. I thought she had gone back to that, Castle of Ruins again after having first gone back there. And I'm like, why is she going back again? But no, she hadn't gone back. She'd fallen asleep. Her exhaustion brought about this nightmare, which was the first real spark of the rebellion of her soul against the darkness that was trying to consume it. And then the soul searching and getting the letter from her friends in the Auto Memoir Doll faction, the little branch, and being called back to action by Spencer, and how much of a positive effect her, helping Luculia reach out to him changed his life for the better, and led him to wanting to reach back out to her, but needing Violet to be that, that middle point. And this gave her, while she can't necessarily equate it with emotions or words, I think she understands the effect that she's had, the fact that she is an integral piece of this puzzle. And so by the end, as I say, with that PTSD sort of level nightmare, with her recounting the effect that she's had on some of the characters we've seen thus far, and ultimately confronting Hodgins again in the end, and they're both, sort of realizing for themselves that in the aftermath of this heinous war, of the battle, of the bloodshed, they both have aspects of life and living and positivity that they're clinging on to. It was, it was satisfying for that. The episode opened, and like the first half of it was kind of been there, done that. But then the turning point with her going back to the ruin and then experiencing the nightmare and then recounting her steps, retracing her steps with everyone that she's had a positive effect on, and then finally culminating back there face to face with Hodgins, her, for all intents and purposes, caregiver in the absence of Gilbert, and they're both coming mutually to this realization of what they can accomplish and what they have accomplished. That made the episode worthwhile to me. Even though I wasn't in the best of moods, I wasn't bouncing off the walls and really thoroughly invested in it as I had been the previous couple of episodes. It was still a worthwhile episode. It was still a worthwhile watch. And so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 9 of Violet Evergarden, if you've seen it as well, if you got anything more out of it than I did, if you had a different perspective on any of it. Love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below, as long as we have a great conversation. And I'd love to hear from you if you didn't enjoy this episode, or if you agree with me at all that there were elements to it that were kind of been there, done that, kind of, meh to a point. But if you did find the same kinds of values in it that I did, with the PTSD nightmare, with the, finally culminating with this appreciation of what she has accomplished and wanting to pointedly pursue that, cognizantly, consciously pursue that, there's value in that. So yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, I'll catch you all later. Peace.